We continue the shir in Shvuch HaRan, Rabbi Nachman's life, the seer, the journey of Rabbi Nachman to Eretz Yisrael. We're up to the part where Rabbi Nachman, with his Talmud, his aide, his assistant, were on this warship traveling from the city of Akko, going towards Istanbul, and during that journey they met up with some heavy storms where the ship was in danger of sinking. Also, the fact that they were in the hands of a wild man. The captain of the ship was a wild Turk who was very much uncivilized to a degree, and the crew on that board were actually a murderous crew. It would be inconceivable, incomprehensible to understand how Rabbi Nachman was able to remain alive, because they carried no affection for Jews, especially Jews dressed in the Hasidic garb of the Europeans. Yet somehow a heavenly hand guarded Rabbi Nachman and a student. They remained alive throughout this portion of the trip. We came to the point where this was just a few days before the holiday of Pesach. At first they had no food whatsoever on board. They were worried about fasting for the 8 days. Then they finally came to an island where the sailors had picked up some fruit for them. They thought about having to eat fruit for the entire 8 days of Pesach, but suddenly they came to a land, an island, middle of the Mediterranean. On this island there was a city called Radish. The city of Radish was like a fortress type of city, belonged to the Turks. But there were a large number of Jews living on that city, that island city. They came to that island. Before they got to it, we must go through the mind, what went through the mind of Rabbi Nachman. Rabbi Nachman thought at the time that he knew they were in danger. It was very possible that the captain and crew could possibly kill them. Or two, rather than kill them, they would rather make profit by selling them as slaves. It was customary in those days to sell captives as slaves, especially Jewish captives. Now, what if they would come to a forsaken island? The captain and crew would sell them as slaves there. They'd have nothing of their belongings. Then they began to think, to contemplate the risks, and the effects would mean they'd be there without tallis, tefillin, any religious articles. They'd have no time to study Torah, to daven, to keep the Shabbos as slaves. They might be imprisoned there, enslaved there for the rest of their lives. This was very possible. And of course, this was a very worrisome item, what to do in a case like that. And of course, this is a problem that could confront any person at any time. If he's ever in an isolated location, a lost island with no opportunity of returning. Rabbi Nachman thought about this for a long time. He thought about it, meaning that he studied it very deeply. Remember that his mind now was far more advanced than it had been previously, prior to his trip to Eretz Yisrael. He now possessed a mind that was superior to any, just not any person alive then, but to most tzaddikim of the past. And so Rabbi Nachman attained a level of wisdom where he was able to understand the possibility of serving Hashem, obeying all 613 mitzvahs by proxy, doing it in a manner not similar to that which we do today. For example, this is a very strange type of example because it reveals something which would seem strange to us. We would not expect this. It is brought in the Zohar Kodesh that Yaakov Avinu, we just learned it recently, the Chumash, Yaakov Avinu, when serving Lavan, arranged with Lavan, through mutual consent, that Yaakov Avinu would take the cattle, and those that will be born with striped, or speckled, spotted, would belong to Yaakov Avinu. The rest, the remainder, would belong to Lavan. Now, how could he have these cattle give birth to striped cattle? How do you get stripes on cattle? Spotted, speckled. So he took sticks, long sticks, He carved out on these sticks stripes, spots, and placed them at the watering trough. When the cattle that were pregnant, cows that were pregnant, came to this trough and drank, they were attracted by this bright color of these sticks. They stared at it. And naturally, as is natural, the result is that the birth of their calves was exactly what they looked at. Many times you know that the woman is afraid to look at certain things, she might give birth to that. Among humans too. In this case, of course, this is natural and normal, and so the cows gave birth to striped calves, spotted and speckled. This is what the Chumash tells us. The Zohar Kodesh says the Chumash doesn't come to tell us stories, tales. There is something much deeper than that. What was Yaakov Avinu doing with these sticks? He was supposed to be serving Hashem. What kind of Avodas Hashem was this act of making these sticks striped? The Zohar Kodesh says that Yaakov Avinu was performing the mitzvah of tefillin. This was the mitzvah of tefillin. How do you put on tefillin? By making striped and speckled sticks. Very mysterious item. And if he possessed, since he possessed the hide of cattle, on which the writing of the tefillin takes place, we use that for the writing of the tefillin, parchment. He had a quill very easily. He had ink, and he had the knowledge of the Torah. Why couldn't he have written the chapters himself? Why couldn't he have then made the tefillin himself and worn regular tefillin as we do? To compound that question, make it more difficult, the Gemara says that Hashem said to Moshe Rabbeinu, Ekev Asher Shoma Avraham B'Kaili, Hashem said that the forefathers of the Jews, the Avos HaKadoshim, were very much beloved by Hashem. Why? Because Avraham, for example, Hashem said, obeyed me, listen to me very closely, Yishma and Mishmati, Kaisai v'Teiroi Soy. Avraham Avinu obeyed my what? My Titus, two Titus. He obeyed not only the 613 mitzvahs of the Torah Shebiksav, the written Torah, but also every one of the mitzvahs in the oral Torah, the Gemara, which means an infinite number. Hundreds of thousands of mitzvahs were obeyed by Avraham Avinu. Of course, as we stated too, the Mefarshim say that we find, as an example, this is fitting for Hanukkah, it's not part of the topic, but it pays to bring it in. It is brought that the Galamukis says that in Hanukkah we have, very apropos, we have a din, you recall, that when you light the Hanukkah candles, there is a limit to the height. It's best to do it between 7 and 10 tvachim, but if you cannot, you must place it higher, and the maximum height that you're allowed to put the Hanukkah candles is chaf ames, 20 ames. Why 20 ames? What's that number 20? The answer is that the word esteemed is the gematria keser. Keser is the highest of the sfiras. Keser is called 20 because if you go from top to bottom, the top sfira to the bottom one, then back to the top, you have 10 going down, 10 going up, together you have 20. Keser means the crown over all of Kedusha, of all of holiness. The crown meaning, it's called Keser Torah, the crown that encompasses all of the Torah. And we know, the Gemara says, Yerushalmi, that where do we find the whole Torah encompassed into one capsule form? It is the Aseres HaDibros, the 10 Commandments. These 10 Commandments, if you count the letters, you will find there are 613 mitzvahs, and therefore there are 613 words exactly in the 613 letters in the 10 Commandments. 613, count them, you'll find there are 620. 620 because 613 up to the last two words, Asher L'Dayacha, that's 7 letters more, and these 7 make 620. what is 620? 613 mitzvahs d'oraisa in Atayna, and Sheva mitzvahs d'Rabbanan. There are 7 mitzvahs d'Rabbanan, as for example, the washing of hands, Eidavin, and reading the Megillah. The 7th mitzvah of the Rabbanan is the mitzvah of Hanukkah. Note carefully, the last 7 letters are Asher L'Reyacha, the 7th letter, corresponding to Hanukkah, is the Chaf. Chaf is Esrim, 20 amas high. Why 20 amas high? Because this is the protection against anything going wrong, against the wrong type of light. We have the light of Torah. You have the light of evil, which means evil knowledge, philosophy, or other types of wrong knowledge. Because this atheism is, when they attempt to inject this into a person's mind, the Kesser, the real light, protects them. The light of the Menayna, up to the point of Esrim. Now, if you go back to this point, we'll dwell on this topic much more this Shabbos mitzvah. Back to our point where Hashem said that Avraham Avinu obeyed Torah Yisai. He obeyed every one of the mitzvahs with the Edaisa from the written Torah and Torah Shabbat Peh, the mitzvahs of the Rabbonah. Avraham Avinu was so learned, he covered all the mitzvahs better than we do today, naturally. If he covered all his mitzvahs, he must have done them, it would seem, he did them physically. Now here we say that Yaakov Avinu went to the extent of carving out sticks, shaping them, and then scraping off bits of the bark, creating designs in them. And all this work represented the mitzvah of tefillin, which would lead us to believe, to state, that the rest of the mitzvahs too were done in this manner. In order to do other mitzvahs, he did certain mysterious types of actions which would cover different mitzvahs. Sounds very strange. Yet the Arizal said that what is meant by this is that it is possible for a person who understands in depth the secrets of these mitzvahs, the kavanas of the mitzvahs, that he could perform the mitzvahs no matter where he is, by doing certain things that are on the same level, that are equal to the act of that mitzvah. In the case of Yaakov Avinu, these sticks represent the idea, the concept that it's possible to serve Hashem even if you haven't got the tools with which to do it. So a person, wherever he is, a person, let's say, on an island, the Arizal would be, without a pair of tefillin, and without cattle, and without sticks with stripes, understanding the depth, the thought behind the mitzvah, he could still perform these mitzvahs. So this was the Arizal's achievement in Kedusha, in holiness, Madrega, where he got to the point where he felt no longer afraid. If he'd ever have to remain on an island for the rest of his life, he'd be able to serve Hashem and perform every one of the mitzvahs in whatever manner would be necessary at that place and time. Now, as we said, they came to the island of the city of Radish, and there, the Arizal thought perhaps, no, he might be able to be zecher to somehow get matzahs and wine. That was uppermost in their minds for Pesach. Now, how do you get, you can never ask the captain or the crew to purchase these things for you. First of all, you cannot communicate with them. They couldn't speak Turkish. Somehow, though, the captain came to them and said that with sign language, you must have food, and perhaps in order to simplify it, I'll take along one of you with me to go purchase this food. This, of course, was a very serious, or practically fatal error on the part of the captain. As the Menachem said, Hashem twisted the mind of the captain, where he lost his senses momentarily, and made this statement. By doing this, he had revealed to the people in that city that there were actual passengers on board. They were not prisoners. He took Arizal's Talmud, his student, with him through the city of Radish, and of course it was very unpleasant because he was dressed in very different type of clothes. He felt very conspicuous and afraid that he might be attacked. But with the protection of the captain, he went to them until he inquired as to the whereabouts of the chief rabbi of that island, city. He was given time off. He went to this chief rabbi, he introduced himself, and the chief rabbi was very impressed. Thought that here's a chance to meet such important people, Jews who had just come back from Eretz Yisrael, and he refused to listen to their problems. He said, all I want is for you to sit down and tell me stories about Eretz Yisrael, interest about the Kedusha of Eretz Yisrael. He was in a hurry, and he was forced to speak tales of Eretz Yisrael. Finally, he reminded himself that in Eretz Yisrael and Tiberia, they had met Rab Tzvi Harka there, one of the great tzaddikim. Tzvi Harka's wife had a brother living on this island, a very big rabbi too. And he asked this chief rabbi, do you know the name, do you know this person? He has a sister in Tiberia. The chief rabbi said, of course he does. He sent for this other rabbi. And this rabbi, Tzvi Harka's brother-in-law, was a very big rabbi, but a very big chacham. He was a Sephardi. And it was this Sephardi who saved them for the holiday of Pesach. So you know that a Yeshua can come from any ways. He took this Talmud to his home, and there he questioned him a lot about their experiences, their adventures they had. And then he said to him, you're going to be at my Seder. I'm inviting you to my Seder. The Talmud was taken aback. He had never imagined it would happen. He'd actually have a Seder for Pesach. So he said to him, first you must go to take a haircut, prepare yourself for the holiday. He was forced to obey. And coming from there, they went through the streets, and suddenly there was a fight broke out amongst some Turks. And they began fighting. They killed aimlessly. So they were forced to flee, hide out for a while, until it was too late to be able to go back and bring the Arizal. So this rabbi, this Sephardi, said to Arizal's Talmud, I want you to know, this is a very unusual statement. It shows the depth, the sincerity of the pure soul of a Jew. He said to the Arizal's Talmud, I want you to know, you've told me who you are, you've told me that your Rebbe, the second one with you, is a very great tzadik, the grandson of the Baal Shem Tov. I'm telling you now that I have lived a life of purity. I've studied Torah all my life. I have surely amassed a big amount of reward in the world to come. I have a lot of Gan Eden awaiting me. I'm going to put up all my future reward in Gan Eden as security for my promise. And I will do everything in my power, and I'm going to succeed in gaining the release of both you and your Rebbe. If I fail, then I lose my Gan Eden. You couldn't ask for a bigger promise than that. Meanwhile, he said, have no fear, do not worry. I'm going to give you a lot of matzahs, wine, food. You'll have a very pleasant Seder on board. And then we'll see you after Seder, after Pesach, and I'll work out a means of ransoming you from this captain. Menachem Mendel went back to the ship, carrying his load of provisions for the Sedarim. Menachem was overjoyed in seeing this. They hadn't expected to. The Sichos of having a full Seder with, hoping just for a drop of fruit. Here they had matzahs, kosher matzahs, of course, the shmuna matzahs, wine, and a meal fit for a king. They spent both nights on board the ship, and after it was over, after the second Seder, the next day, the Menachem went out again to this island, this city, and he went to meet this rabbi again. The rabbi told him that they're working on gaining their release. He said, you should know that your release will be a miracle in itself, because the captain of this ship is not an ordinary person. He is a wild man. He's a Turk, but a wild one, and he prides himself. He has his family tree that dates back to the princes of the Plishtim, the Philistines, the original ones. He is a descendant of the 5 princes of the Plishtim, and naturally, no one carries a greater hatred to Jews than he does. So if we gain your release, then it's a miracle. This rabbi approached the captain of the ship, and he told him, I want to ransom these 2 passengers you have. The captain said to this rabbi, I must admit that there's a miracle that was performed here, because I could have had the lives of these 2 easily. I could have sold them as slaves at any time, and now somehow Hashem twisted my mind, just as Hashem always does for the sake of the Jews against the Jewish enemies. Therefore, I want nothing for them. I only want $200 to pacify my crew, to give them some money. The rabbi and his followers paid the $200. They gained the release of Arizal and his Talmud. They entered into the city, and they were very happy to be free. Of course, they offered this money themselves, but the people wouldn't hear of it. They paid for this price of the ransom, and so they were there for a short time. They were gotten tickets on another ship going to Istanbul, and this time they went straight towards Istanbul. On the way, there was a series of adventures that befell them, which you can read in the Sefer itself. Adventures where they met up with disease, plagues, different islands. They got to one island where they were taken prisoners. They were placed into a dungeon. There was no chance to get out, and some strange, mysterious stranger came and bailed them out. These are all miracles that occurred, meaning always that a person going to do mitzvah somehow, not somehow, but does have hashgacha, a guide, a guard, a guardian angel from heaven who guards over that person, sees that he comes back safely. So that the result was that after all these tribulations, after all these adventures, and many more which were not said, Rabbi Nachman and his Talmud finally came home, and came home in perfection. Perfection means that they were not harmed physically or monetarily, above all, in knowledge. Rabbi Nachman came back as a new type, a new light, a new heavenly light that shone on the horizon, and that continued to shine continues till Mashiach comes. There's no tzadik emes that can compare in greatness to Rabbi Nachman, who achieved this greatness and multiplied it manyfold afterwards, because Rabbi Nachman never stayed on one level for any period of time. He strived always to go higher and higher, each time reaching new levels, and then when he got to the new level, new madrega, he immediately began with new efforts, renewed efforts to reach the still higher level. Rabbi Nachman said that there was nothing in his lifetime that made him as happy as the fact that he was zecher to be in Eretz Yisrael. This statement alone should be enough to encourage anyone that if you cannot go there to settle, to live, at least every Jew, without exception, should strive to visit Eretz Yisrael, to be there, if even for 5 minutes alone. It's worth all the sacrifice in the world. He's a chus of walking 4 steps on this sacred soil, an achievement which Moshe Rabbeinu tried so hard to realize during his lifetime. He worked so hard in tefillah, prayers to Hashem, could not get it. Moshe Rabbeinu, Aharon could not get it, and every Jew today has the opportunity, could realize this, and surely he should not be satisfied until he has achieved it. Now, on his way back, Arizal met up with the return trip. It's close to his home. On the way towards his home, he stopped at the home of a number of leading tzaddikim at that time for a visit. They were all happy to see him back. They all wanted to drink of his knowledge, to discuss Torah with him. First one he stopped at was the home of a certain leader of a sect who was known as the Zokain. Zokain, in Yiddish known as the Zayde, the grandfather. This Zokain was one of the leading students of the Baal Shem Tov. He was very old, a leading figure then, and this Zokain accepted Rabbi Nachman with the warmest hospitality. Rabbi Nachman stayed in his home for the entire night, discussing Torah. The Zokain said to his followers that he never did this before. He never stayed up at night, the whole night, to eat a meal at night. It was against his custom. And for the sake of being together with Rabbi Nachman, he did this. We explained the Gemara Shia that when there is ahava, a deep affection, then a person goes off the normal track. Here he did this out of deep affection. So that we see from here definite proof. As Nosson points out, we see proof that there was definitely the closest, sincerest, deepest friendship between Rabbi Nachman and this Zokin at that time. We see proof from this statement that Rabbi Nachman spent many hours there, close affection and friendship. It wasn't until 18 months later that something occurred. And by the way, this Zokin too made public statements that it was one of the greatest schusim he ever had, greatest pleasures to be able to speak to Rabbi Nachman at that time. It was a schus that he said was worth more than anything in his lifetime. Despite this, 18 months later, out of seemingly nothing, there arose a dispute, a controversy, a conflict, an enmity between the Zokin and Rabbi Nachman. The Zokin began to attack Rabbi Nachman over an obvious false accusation about a very minor item, the question about one's opinion about the quality of a cantor, a chazan, in a certain shul. Very minor, it means nothing to an ordinary person, and surely not to such a high level. But the Satan, the Baal Dava, the Samach Mem, does not make distinctions. If he has to do something, his work, his dedication is to hide or to try to extinguish the light of the tzadik emes, and that is done by creating conflict between tzaddikim. So he brought about this very tragic conflict between the Zokin who began to harass Rabbi Nachman, and that is a long story in itself. Much later on, when we get to a different sefer, we'll discuss this episode in full detail. It's important to know here only the fact that originally the Zokin was friendly to Rabbi Nachman, and it was the small act through the devious plotting of the Satan brought about this enmity. Rabbi Nachman's statement was only that he knew there must be an attack by the Satan against him, because just as in all generations, the Satan dedicates himself to trying to hide or chas v'shalom destroy the tzadik emes. We have just had now, this week's Sedra, where Yosef HaTzadik, who was decidedly the holiest tzaddik alive then, after Yaakov Avinu. Among his brothers, he was surely the holiest, only one classified as HaTzadik, and yet his brothers were all pure and holy too. Shiftei Hashem, the tribes of Hashem. Yet these people who were so great, these brothers, great tzaddikim themselves, allowed their minds to be so distorted, misled, as to be willing to actually murder their own brother, this tzaddik, or at least to kidnap and sell him as a slave, which according to Hebrew law is the same as murder. There's a death penalty for kidnapping a Jew, selling him as a slave. We find, of course, that hiddenly, the Talmud tells us that this had to be punished. And one of the ways in which it was punished was that somehow later generations, the 10 greatest rabbis in history, Rabbi Akiva and his friends, were put to death in a very horrible manner by the Roman king, each one tortured in a different form, to, in a sense, atone for this act of the sale of Yosef HaTzadik. Well, we do see from here that the work of the Satan is to blind others, even great people, to blind them, to turn their hearts against the true tzaddik. And this, in all generations, we find repeated itself throughout. The time of the Gemara, we found machlekes against the leading rabbis. The time of the Achronim, the Arizal had disputes against them. The Baal Shem Tov, who was the leading tzaddik of all, the father of all Chassidim, and who is recognized now as the world's greatest luminary, one of the world's greatest, during his lifetime, had such an intense battle against him by the leading rabbis there that they assembled in order to write up a chedem, ostracizing him, chas v'shalom, during his lifetime that was. How was this done? the Satan poisons the minds and hearts of others against him, and this is what the Satan did to this Zokain. Arizal said, I expected this naturally. I'd have this battle against me, but I did not expect it would come from him. I didn't think he'd be the one in whom the Satan would cloak himself to bring out this battle. It was tragically so, though, and the details of this enmity, the prolonged harassment, will cover in later chapters. Meanwhile, Arizal too visited other great tzaddikim. He also visited the Rashaz. The Rashaz is the Baal HaTanya, the original Lubavitcher Rebbe who wrote the Tanya. It's called the father of all Lubavitcher Chassidus. And as a visitor at this Baal HaTanya, the Baal HaTanya was very thrilled at this Sichos, as naturally he should be. He was zeichet to have Arizal in his home at that time, and there was a close friendship there too, but the Arizal somehow did not bring him close as he did others. Again, the Baal HaTanya tried his very best, we must admit, in trying to please Arizal and find favor in his eyes, and he approached him a number of times for certain types of favors. Arizal spoke highly of the Baal HaTanya, it is true, and there are certain statements more that we'll have in later history, later lessons in this topic. Now, Rosenfeld tells us, as part of this story, to go back for a moment. While Rabbi Zal was in Eretz Yisrael, one of the leading Goinim, a Goin means a genius, a rabbi who's a genius in knowledge. The word Goin, some say, comes from Goin Begematria 60, which means that he knows all of the 60 Gemaras by heart. This great Goin, who was not only a Goin in Migla and Gemara, but also in Kabbalah, approached Rabbi Zal, and very humbly he began to plead with Rabbi Zal. His words were that we know, meaning the leading rabbis of Eretz Yisrael, not just rabbis, but leading Kadeshim, the holy ones, understand that you, Rabbi Zal, did not come to Eretz Yisrael with the intent of the ordinary layman. Ordinary layman comes here, a Jew comes because he's anxious, he craves the security, the knowledge that if he walks 4 steps in Eretz Yisrael, will be assured of receiving Gan Eden and a portion of the world to come. He'll get paradise for it. This is what the ordinary layman comes for. We know that you didn't come with that thought in mind at all, because Rabbi Zal, he owns Gan Eden, so there's no problem about getting it. But there must have been something much deeper in your kavanas. Kavanah means intention. Now, what could you perhaps, this was in a pleading tone, could you perhaps reveal to us at least one of the many deep kavanas you had in coming to Eretz Yisrael? In other words, one of the kavanas that you now gained, a new understanding and knowledge about mitzvahs that you gained in coming to Eretz Yisrael. Rabbi Zal said, I would rather not reveal this because I'm sure that this must remain secret. Meanwhile, this Goin, this tzadik, pleaded with Rabbi Zal very strongly, beseeched him. Rabbi Zal was not stubborn ever. So he said finally to this tzadik, all right then, tell me, do you know the secret kavanas of tefillin? And this tzadik said, again, very modestly, a little. I know what the Arizal says about it. He began to repeat the words of the Priyat Chaim and say for the Kavanas, the depth of tefillin is something which is very hidden to us. But he began with these deep secrets about tefillin. Rabbi Zal stopped him and said, no, that's not the Kavanas of tefillin, because you don't know then what's meant by the boundaries of Eretz Yisrael, the 4 boundaries, the parshas of the tefillin, how they are interwoven. Rabbi Zal said, and now listen. He moved his cloak back and began to speak. A very powerful tone. As soon as he began to speak, to reveal the secret, blood began to spurt from his throat. He was forced to stop, and he said to the tzaddik, you see, there's a definite sign from heaven that I must keep this item a secret. This tzaddik was so taken aback, he felt so hurt, so embarrassed. He couldn't stay. He began to beg, to cry in front of the Arizal, to beg for forgiveness. He wouldn't move from there until Arizal finally said to him that he's mechel. Of course, Arizal didn't hold anything against him. He wasn't angry at him. But this tzadik was so hurt and so afraid of any ultimate future punishment for this, that he begged mechila from Arizal, and until Arizal forgave him, said he forgave him, he wouldn't move from that spot. This we see, at least, a testimony from others as to the greatness of Rabbi Arizal's achievement in knowledge. Now, while Rabbi Arizal was there too, there was one of the tzadikim, Menachem Mendel who asked that Rabbi Arizal arrange a shidduch between his son and Rabbi Arizal's daughter. In other words, this was a shidduch of two great tzaddikim, of course. It was a big schus to have the daughter of Arizal. The Gemara says a person should sell everything he has, everything he's got, for the schus of marrying the daughter of a Talmud Chacham. Marrying the daughter of the greatest tzaddik in the world, a person should sell his head if necessary. So he offered this shidduch to Rabbi Arizal, and Rabbi Arizal replied, "It seems, I see, that my daughter is going to come to Eretz Yisrael," which means he accepts the shidduch. So they made a party. Rabbi Arizal's words were, "My daughter will come to Eretz Yisrael." That's all. They made a feast there. This was like an engagement party, agreeing that this was a Tikuney. And at the Suda, they invited all the greatest Ge'inim, greatest rabbis of Eretz Yisrael. While there, of course, what do they discuss? What do rabbis talk about? Well, you'd never guess it. They talk about Gemara, about Torah. They discussed matters of Torah. They got into a deep discussion. And when they discuss it orally. They don't look into the Gemara. They began to discuss exchange of words. They got to a certain topic, and they said that in order to solidify this topic, to clear it up, they need a certain Nidasha Kodesh. There's a certain Nidasha Kodesh in the Gemara someplace, this one Nidasha, which would clear up the whole topic. They recall this Nidasha, but they cannot recall where it is written. They all began to discuss, each one of them said, "I just finished learning Shas, just recently." This one said, "My 4th time, my 15th time," and so on. And they began to think, where is this Nidasha Kodesh? The Kiyam Shas, where is it? Each one thought, and no one could arrive at the place. Rabbi Arizal sat on the side very quietly, and they said, "Why struggle? Here we have the answer." Rabbi Arizal said, "Don't ask me. As a matter of course, anibus." Finally, he saw they were suffering so much, so he said to them, "Well, if you look in the Gemara in Zvachim, top of the daf, you'll find that Nidasha Kodesh there." They looked, and exactly as Rabbi Arizal said, it was there. So if it hadn't been there, it would have been there because he said so. It's understood. But Rabbi Arizal knew the Shas as clearly as though it was an open book in front of him, in front of his eyes, as though it was actually open. By heart was the same as though he read it inside. Now, it is not written in the story where the Nidasha Kodesh is, but somehow, many years ago, I received inside information. I forget who it was from. Might have been an angel who came down and told it to me, but I believe that the information I got was that it's the Nidasha Kodesh is Daf Mem Zayin Amud Aleph. There is what if you look at the topic there, you'll see that you can probably understand what the topic revolved around. In any event, it's logical too. As I said, I have no proof to this, but I recall that it was given to me from a very high source, and it would seem logical that the topic would be what they discuss. After all, what would they speak about too? The coming of Mashiach. In reference to, of course, halachas, reference to the Binyan Beis HaMikdash, the Avodah Beis HaMikdash. So the result was then that they wrote Tanoim, and it meant then that Rabbi Arizal's daughter would come to Eretz Yisrael to marry the son of the Vitebsk Zal. Rabbi Arizal came home, and when he got back to his home, this was in Eretz Yisrael, he got back to his home, he was told a little while later that somehow the Chassan, Tapskazal's son, the chas, this young chassan, suddenly passed away. It means there was no more shidduch. That was the end. There was no chance, by law of average, there was no chance at all that Arizal would come to Yisrael anymore. Arizal had said when he was there, it looks like my daughter will come to Yisrael. He didn't say she'll marry this person. He said she'll come to Yisrael. A short time later, Arizal made a shidduch with another tzadik in his own city, nearest city, and this tzadik, the chassan, decided to go to Yisrael and settled there, and so the words of Arizal came true. Exactly what he had predicted came true, that his daughter would eventually settle in Yisrael, because the words that Arizal once spoken must come true. To conclude this story, we have a strange, short anecdote, which would be up for anyone's judgment to interpret this story. Nosson finishes it with one sentence. We'll give you the story first, and then you can analyze it yourself, because fortunately we have no time of this tape left. We'll make it very brief. Arizal tells a story. At one time, a king selected 3 men to carry a state's secret, a very important state secret, to another king. Now, these 3 men were entrusted with this secret, each one of them, so that in case 2 die on the way, the third at least will have a chance of getting there. And they were told that under no conditions are these to be revealed, lost, or surrendered to anyone else. They'll have to pass through different lands, and these are all lands of the enemy, and never to allow this secret to fall into enemy hands. The men are told that the first one went through and succeeded in outwitting all the enemy countries, went through safely, and brought the secrets to the second king. The second messenger went through and was captured. One of the enemy countries, and while captured there, he used his wits, his wisdom, in escaping from his captors. He escaped. This took a lot of wit and courage, and got out safely and brought these secrets to the second king. Third one went through. He was captured, and they tried to get the secrets from him. They felt certain he was a messenger from the first king. They took this third one, locked him in a dungeon with chains, and there began a systematic series of excruciating types of tortures, the worst possible tortures conceivable. And this went on for a long time. Despite all this torture, this man remained loyal. This messenger refused to divulge any secret whatsoever to his captors. It got to the point where the captors felt certain that he could not have contained any secrets, and therefore they released him. He came to the second king, this third messenger, and then the problem arose, which one of these 3 deserves the greatest amount of reward? Some maintained the first one because he was the wisest of all. He went through it completely safely without getting caught. Others said the second one is better because he was caught, but he was even wise, he was able to escape. Others said that the third one because he withstood so much torture and showed his loyalty to the king. The king's statement was that the highest reward belongs to the third one. He was able to go through, accept these tortures, and despite that remain loyal to the king, therefore he deserves the greatest credit of all. Rav Nosson says that those who have a little bit seichel will understand the meaning behind this story. There's nothing further said about it. As a simple hint, of course, it means that a person is sent out to this world. He's got to go through enemy territory and return with this secret intact. That secret, of course, is the neshama. The person is sent down with to keep that neshama pure, not to allow it to fall into the hands of the enemies, the hands of the Satan, enemies being those who will contaminate the neshama with sins and wrong types of faith and so on. And therefore, the question, of course, is which one deserves more credit, the one that goes through the tortures in his lifetime for the sake of his emunah, faith, and so on? The answer is, as we have heard in the story. Above all, we see from the story and from Arizal's trip too, that the ikad is a pure dedication, devotion to Hashem, to Hashem's mitzvahs, And that's because a person will be deserving, he will merit to complete this mission perfectly, to come out of it with true Kedusha. And if we take this lesson to mind and fulfill our mission, we'll be zecher very shortly to see with our eyes the coming of Moshiach Tikuney, B'yam Beis HaMikdash, the Mapol, the downfall of all the enemies of the Jews, and the Simcha Kolius for the Am Yisrael, and Heda, Amen, Amen.